Welcome to the Talent Revolution, the podcast where we dive into real life tales from the trenches of the working world.
We're going to talk about all things HR and talent acquisition and share the kind of stories and insights only people who've lived it can really appreciate.
I'm Joe Shambom.
And I'm Jill Caniglio-Kirk.
Between the two of us, we've clocked plenty of hours in these trenches, recruiting, building teams, managing change, and solving all sorts of people puzzles.
And let's be honest, Joe, we've learned a lot the hard way. And each episode, we're going to bring you stories from our own experience that I'm sure you're going to relate to, as well as practical tips that you can use in your own role.
Sometimes we'll be joined by guests who's going to bring in their own hard-earned wisdom, insights, and of course, their tales from their trenches.
And a lot of times it'll just be the two of us, Joe, talking shop and swapping more stories.
So whether you're in HR, talent acquisition, or just passionate about building better workplaces,
you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
So a hot topic in the world right now, and it's really stemming into the whole economic situation around finding new opportunities for folks and companies looking to, find the right talent is really the experience. And I think, Jill, talking about the candidate experience, we need to actually bring it up and we need to dive into it. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I would agree. I can't tell you the last time I logged into LinkedIn and start scrolling through messages where I didn't see someone really bashing a company and kind of calling out some of these bad behaviors and some of these bad experiences. So I think it's a super relevant topic. And I think us trying to focus on, how important that process is and how do you create a positive candidate experience is very timely and hopefully will be appreciated by folks out there.
Well, and the hot word is ghost, right? And it's really disheartening to hear about all the ghosting going on. And it's happening on both sides of the table, on the candidate side, believe it or not, but also a lot of the company side. And whether it's the recruiting or the HR or the manager, there's this ghosting going on. And it's killing the candidate experience as they go through this whole process.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know the last time I've talked to a person that's in the job market themselves who hasn't complained about this ghosting phenomenon that seems to be becoming more of a norm rather than an exception. And, I think it's definitely something companies should reflect on and think about. How do they maybe manage a better process and, keep communication real with candidates and not get labeled as ghosting?
And you nailed it. It's communication, right? So if we're going to break down into what is the candidate experience, at least in my 2 cents, is communication. It's communication from the start, from the outreach to the interview process, the phone screens, the feedback. It's all about communication, and the communication breakdown then just really goes back to a bad experience. And unfortunately, people remember the bad stuff, not the good stuff.
Right. And I'll be honest, I would say overall, from people I've talked to in the market and my own personal experience, I think when you have a recruiter involved that's kind of brokering this process, perhaps that results in a better experience for a lot of candidates where it's someone's job, so to speak, to give that feedback. I've also seen that breakdown where companies are not providing feedback to recruiters, right? And then it becomes this kind of game of, I don't have anything to tell someone, so I'm just going to kind of lay low and all those other things. But I think you're right. Mm-hmm.
But at least in that third-party recruiter, which third-party recruiters aren't bad, everyone, both recruiting and TA and HR people, it's at least someone that the candidate can go to and they would hopefully respond at least saying, I don't have any information and this is a problem, which then creates a flag on that whole experience. But at least it does give someone that they can talk to and, have that at least some type of dialogue, right? Whether it's the real closure or not. But if we talk about communication and we talk about the whole candidate experience, in my opinion, it starts with the posting and the company information, right? It starts from the very beginning of it, and that's if it's a proactive. If it's a proactive approach, it'll start with the recruiter. But if it's really the company posting a job. It's what does that job description look like? What does the company website have on there, and the details and stories and product information about that company? And then what's in that whole job description? It starts there. And then, of course, if it was a proactive outreach from a recruiter, what does that communication look like? What is that message they're sending, whether it's through email or LinkedIn or whatever other tool, or the voicemail that they're leaving for that candidate? It really starts there.
Right. And I would echo your sentiments there, saying starting with that job posting and describing it accurately and how the company is putting that together is really important. But whether it's an internal recruiter or HR team or an external recruiter, I feel like it all starts with setting up the expectations with the candidate of this is what you can expect in the process. Trying to define how long this is going to take, perhaps, what is the goal for getting someone into the role? What are the steps going to look like? And over what series of time will those things happen? To me, no matter who it is and what the job is, those are some really key elements that need to happen early on with a candidate so that we can avoid some of the negative things that we talked about.
And so what you're talking about is, even before the candidate gets involved, is that intake session, which I want to coin as the strategy session, because it really truly is a strategy that gets set up with, if it's the even internal HR and TA organization, with the manager on what is the plan, what's the hiring team, who's going to ask what questions, how are we going to screen these candidates and what we're looking for, and the fit for that person in that role. It starts there, and then that streams into everything else. And then that allows the recruiter to set that tone with the conversation with the candidate, explaining and qualifying them, but then also, what does the process look like? How many interviews do they look like they're going to expect? Or if there's an assessment, or if there's the next phases of it all is really gets set by that strategy session that they have internally.
Right. Yeah. And just to break it down further, Joe, what I heard you talking about are really getting all the key stakeholders together and putting pen to paper and defining all of those steps. So I think too many companies kind of are excited about what's the role, let's get it posted. Then they just kick off recruitment and they don't necessarily have everybody on the same page and have those goals and targets and strategic alignment that you talked about kind of fixed. And I believe if that's the case, it's really hard to give the candidate a good experience, because even internally, you're not sure what, success is going to look like.
And I'm going to put that a lot on my fellow TA folks, right? They, in my vision, is they're the conductor of this whole process, right? They may not be the one, creating the music and putting the whole band together in essence, because that's the whole hiring leader with their interview panels and the HR team, et cetera. But they're the conductor that's going to then orchestrate ensuring that things move along and everyone has their roles and responsibilities. So therefore, when is feedback going to be received when you submit a candidate or after an interview, and who's going to interview the candidate for these different areas and these different capabilities as we move through the process, right? I put it on them to really help drive it. Again, it's a cross-functional team, but I think the TA is the conductor.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would also say, they play a really important role with that candidate in conveying and sharing maybe not all of the details of what that looks like or what the process exactly is going to entail, but really of shaping that whole journey with the candidate, painting that picture. This is what you can expect. This is how things are going to work. These are the steps. This is the timeline. So to me, they play a critical role, whether that person's title is recruiter or HR person or whatever it is. Whoever's kicking that off has a tremendous amount of responsibility of ensuring success with all of those things.
So we talk about success and the experience here, thinking through the interviews. And I think that is where a big, I don't know what's the right word exactly, but frustration maybe comes into play of how many interviews and process should we go through? So I'm going to flip it to the HR side, Jill. I mean, you're the HR expert. What I know there's no exact answer into it, but how many interviews is the right, what would you suggest to somebody saying, how would I set this up, and how many interviews are too many or too little?
Well, I mean, he's one of those favorite HR responses, which, well, it depends, Joe. So it depends on the company, depends on the role, the level. I think you have to look at your own organization and put together what's doable, what's manageable, and what really gives you what you need to have the comfort level with getting through that process. I would argue that, to me, bringing a candidate in on separate occasions to meet multiple people is probably a little overkill in today's world. I would definitely advise people take advantage of people's in-person time and have them maybe meet with multiple people or look at perhaps panel type structures. I think it saves both companies a lot of time and candidates a lot of time. But I do think it depends. And I think as an organization, the HR team, talent acquisition team, and leaders really need to partner and define, what is our experience going to look like for the candidate? And, maybe we have a B, and C, right? Depending on the role, depending on several factors of what that looks like. So I think to the extent you can define that and put together a game plan for your organization, the more successful you're going to be in achieving the outcomes you want.
But just one more interview, Jill. I need them to meet this person. Come on, it's okay. It's just one more interview. I mean, how many times have we heard that in our life?
Well, we've all heard it. And then, I always flip it and say, I always flip it and say, okay, we have this person excited about our organization, right? We presented what our plan and timeline was, and how is it going to be viewed that we're having yet another person that we want them to meet. So I think, truthfully, things change. We have to be flexible. We have to be realistic, but we have to think of things through the candidate lens as well, because let's be honest, some of the positions that we're looking to fill, we're competing for talent. And there's lots of people out there that perhaps are in the job market, but sometimes we're competing for people that have choices. And it may come down to them saying that company just seemed uncertain. They kept wanting me to jump through one more hoop. And it makes me think about what working there is going to be like. So, like I said, I'm realistic. Things need to be flexible. But I also always remind the leaders in my company about how does that look and reflect on the company? And how do we present it in a light that is viewed positively by the candidate versus, like I said, as one more thing that they have to do to kind of prove themselves.
And what we also have to think about is not to just that candidate. It's all the candidates, and then the feedback that they're going to give to their friends or other folks that they're going to say, oh, yeah, I've interviewed at that place. That's whatever it is, a positive or negative, right? So the experience it resonates for not just that person. It will go into that 6 degrees of separation as it keeps going, and you'll get a reputation, unfortunately, good or bad, hopefully
Absolutely.
good. But it does resonate through that. And that's what everyone has to keep in mind on the interview side of it.
Right. I mean, that definitely reflects your brand, and you have to be thoughtful about what do you want that brand image to be. And you have to be careful about, that journey and it not becoming something you're proud of and something. Like I said, it's like the word culture. It's the kind of sum of all these behaviors in a company, and sometimes it just happens, right? So no matter what your statement says on your website about your brand and your company, et cetera, the word on the street is sometimes more impactful to the candidate you're trying to attract.
And then if it's negative, it's a hard thing to overcome, right? And we can talk about that in another episode on those things, because I've had to do that in my life. But, you attack it head on, but it's hard to change once it's potentially out there on that side of it. Thinking through, the whole process, and I think we talked about communication for candidate experience, but I think it's the feedback, right? And feedback really plays a huge aspect into it. So it's the candidate giving you feedback, right? And they'll do that at different stages, right? Well, that job description is actually really good. I really liked it. I appreciated it. Or there wasn't much there, Joe. To the interviews, to really the big thing about feedback comes from the hiring manager. What did you like about this candidate? What didn't you like? Where are the gaps? And getting that. And then as a recruiter, trying to give that back to the candidate, and then vice versa. What did the candidate feel from the manager and the other folks that they've met with
Right.
back to the team, and hopefully you get that dialogue instead of it went okay, I'm interested. You got to be able to try to pull more, because then you get to enhance that whole experience for both sides.
Right.
And the more you can give, and I know a lot of folks are looking at it going, well, there might be a legal thing on certain aspects of feedback, but the more you can give tips and tricks back to the candidate, I think is worth it, because it just gives them honesty and be able to do better. If they didn't do well, even if they did well, here's what was really good, and we like these things, and that side of it. I don't know where you stand on feedback, but I think it's super important.
I do think it's a delicate topic and something you have to carefully navigate. I always try to focus on, if I were on the other side of this, what would I want to hear? What's useful? What's not? Truthfully, at the end of the day, there's not a good or bad candidate. It's really, we're trying to assess the fit and the opportunity for this person to succeed in this environment and in this role, right? And one thing I really put some energy into when I am leading recruitment on my own is really trying to help the candidate, put them at ease, let them know who are they meeting, what might they, what is their approach to the interview going to be like? I know this isn't necessarily the way everybody goes about it, but I feel like, in my view, the more relaxed the candidate could be in truly being themselves and being prepared for this meeting and know what's coming, the more fruitful, the more we're going to get out of that meeting. And hopefully the more successful the process is going to be. I don't know how you feel about that, Joe, but it's definitely the way I like to roll when it comes to, prepping my candidates and making sure that I'm kind of respecting what I would want if I were on the flip side of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, prepping the candidate is a great, I've done it all the time, right? And you really, again, you're not giving them the answers, but you're giving them the concept, especially in the behavioral side of things. We're going to want to know about these types of things, right? So then therefore, thinking on your feet is great, but I'm sure they have these experiences and they've gone through that. To think of those examples and to be able to be a little bit more prepared is definitely helpful. To be able to say, this interviewee would like to know more about this, and then this one, and then therefore they can prepare. And again, you don't know the answers, so they have to, have some hopefully notes and prep for it, but it definitely gives them it's not an advantage, it's just insight to what's going on, and allows them to ask questions and be prepared. So absolutely, prep is, again, you're not leading the witness, but you're just giving them the concepts of what's going on. And I think that should happen for all roles. It doesn't matter the level as well.
Yeah, and I think it really shapes the candidate experience, because the candidate views that and says, this company is in making an investment in me. They want me to be successful, right? They're supporting me in this journey, and they kind of understand that it's kind of hard to be on this side of the interview process. So they feel like they have an ally inside of the company in a lot of cases, right? And I think that's what we want. We want someone to know we're advocating for them. If we weren't interested in them, we wouldn't be in this position of bringing them in and taking the organization's time, right?
Well, the recruiter starts that relationship, right? And we're managing that relationship all the way through. And again, sometimes we have to break up with them at the end, but you're going to, only one's going to get the job typically. But yeah, you're trying to, that's the recruiter's job, is to advocate for these different experiences from these different candidates, and giving the manager a slate of folks that have the criteria that they're looking for. And that's the experience that the hiring manager should have, right? And the expectation from the hiring manager is a slate of candidates that's qualified, that has a range that, and that's the great partnership with the recruiter appropriately is, I'm looking for these things, and provide that back to them, and maybe throw in a little curveball of, well, what do you think of this, right? And it gets them thinking, to be able to ensure that they're looking at all angles instead of being tunnel vision. So, it's the experience is a relationship as you go through, and unfortunately at the end you have to break up with somebody. But in my philosophy, a Joeism, if you want to call it, is all candidates going through the process should really want these roles, should really want to work at this company. And that's the experience that they should have, because then in the end, maybe if I do break up with them and they don't get the job, they're going to want to potentially look at another opportunity or refer their friends, right? You've got it when you've done a good experience and they say, hey, I appreciate it, I'm disappointed, but I saw you had a XYZ position, I think I know somebody for that. Or you can go back to them and they're referring it. Therefore, you've actually known you've done a really good job that way.
Right. Yeah. So far, we focused a lot on what talent acquisition and HR professionals could do. But for a minute, I'd like to talk about, how do our leaders in the company handle this process? How do we make them ready for it and ensure that they're doing justice in this candidate process, right? Because I think that's such a big part of the experience. I've had occasions where candidates say, listen, I left this interview and the person I didn't have an opportunity to say a lot. They didn't ask me a lot. They told me all these things. They told me all these stories, or they shared a lot about themselves, right? So all of us out there have probably had a candidate come back and you're, kind of turning red and going, what? Huh? What happened? So I definitely think it makes sense to focus on the role that interviewer, the internal leader in your company, plays in shaping that candidate experience. And I think it really starts with making sure they're prepared, no matter what level someone's at, that they have perhaps, an interview playbook, a guide of questions, right? That you've talked to them about what are their plans with this candidate. I don't know how you feel about that, Joe, but.
No, that's where we go back to the strategy session at the start, right? And that's why HR needs to be involved as well, so we're all on the same page of who's going to be asking what questions, whose role is what in each section of the process, and then making sure that that's the core team. But then we're going to invite other folks in to be part of the interview panel. They need to be educated as well, and that I still say that's the hiring manager's responsibility is, hey, I'm interviewing candidates for this role. I would like you to be part of my process. Here's what I want you to be able to ask in this framework, and I'm looking for this type of answers back so I can help gauge the candidate in the evaluation process. So setting the expectation from the strategy, helping prep the manager, getting those interview guides if you have them built out from a company, or how maybe using AI, right? AI now can help build your interview guides and interview questions as long as you use it consistently for that same job, and really drive it there. And again, the recruiter obviously, unfortunately, has to follow up and touch base on all those. Is everything all set and ready? But it starts from there, and the hiring leader has that huge responsibility to help support that. And I'm going to plug in, the hiring manager also has to help support sourcing and advertising for the role, right? They have a network of people in this world in what they're looking for. They need to help share that as well. So it's a little plug for the TA team.
Go TA. We love you. We need you. We appreciate you. Yeah, no, I would agree with you wholeheartedly there. Another thing I think it's important to reflect on is, we're in this different world where people aren't necessarily coming into your company, right? Some of this might be done remotely, right? And how do we make sure that candidate experience really reflects the company's brand and is well done, whether it's in person or remotely? You have any commentary on that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, that's, kind of like if they're watching our podcast, we kind of branded our backgrounds that way. So you could have some branded backgrounds, some different intro videos to be able to really help share that information to the candidate. So it's a consistent message and gives them that experience through the process, especially because if it's virtual, right, they're not going to come in and see the building and walk through and follow up that way. Especially virtually now, is making sure people are on time. So you might want to do a host, right? And I've done this many times as the recruiter, join the call beforehand, make sure everything's all set up with the candidate, I can always then ping the manager saying, where are you? And so forth, and help stall that process of it to be able to keep a good candidate experience. But virtually does add a few extra little wrinkles to it, but it's part of at least the first stages of the interviews to be able to save time. Plus the global organizations, depending on how big you are, you might have folks around the world that are going to be interviewing, right? And you're not going to fly them in or fly the candidate there. So you utilize the different web tools to be able to do that, and trying to keep a consistent process of it. And, obviously, like I said, the backgrounds, I think, is a big thing. It's a cool aspect. They can talk about it, that they can ask questions about it. Because I know I've done that in my search before. It's like, oh, that's a cool background. What does that mean? Because it was an interesting logo, and, it's a good conversation starter.
Right. Yeah, it actually makes me think of something on the opposite topic, which is if you have a candidate coming to your premises, You cannot be clear enough with where to park, how long that takes,
Yeah.
right? There might be multiple buildings or entrances. I just definitely have had on the School of Hard Knocks there where someone's in the wrong building and I'm suddenly ushering an executive to a different building to meet someone. So you definitely
I've
want to
ran
make
out
sure.
in the parking lot and said, "No, I'm over here. Come here," and help walk them in, and they're all frustrated. And it was the middle of the
Yeah.
summer, so they're sweating, and it's like, "Calm down. It's
Right.
okay. Here's some water." But yeah, no,
Exactly.
a map of the area,
Right.
who to call, what to do, obviously. I think the old days of being 30 minutes ahead of time is too much nowadays, even 15, because people are back to back, unfortunately. So
Mm-hmm.
my rule of thumb is maybe 10 minutes before,
Right.
and walk in. That gives you a little time. You're to be able to decompress, get ready, maybe hit the restroom, and then be able to be ready for the interview process.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So it just made me laugh that, we worry about technology not working, but sometimes all kinds of things can go wrong. So usually through those, experiences, we know how to dial in our instructions and what we tell our candidates and those things to make sure that it doesn't have a second happening. So to speak.
Absolutely. And I kind of touched on it, Jill, and was the AI piece. Where are you at on AI and the whole candidate experience side of things? I know we'll dive into AI in another future topics of podcasts, but kind of a little bit more. Is there any AI kind of hot button you want to share?
Well, I would say if it's not a resource you're leveraging, in your HR team, it definitely is something I've gleaned a lot of efficiency from. And if I think about the candidate experience, one way I've used it is really to construct maybe letters to candidates. How can I craft a message to them that does give them feedback, whether they're getting this position or not getting this position? I've also seen lots of not good examples posted on the internet of kind of bot letters people have gotten, right? So, it's a tool, but I think you also have to humanize it and have a human person go through it, make sure whatever you're using AI for reflects your company brand, right? It's also something that if you invest time in it, it will kind of come back to you, meaning it will start to learn your brand. It'll start to learn your voice. So I think don't be discouraged early on if it sounds like a robot's giving you information back. I think the more you invest in it, the more you're going to get back that really reflects who your company is. But one way simply I've used it in this process is to construct feedback notes to candidates and used it just to drive some efficiency in that way. So that, like you said, communication is key in this process. I think face-to-face is always best. Personal communication is always best, but keeping that communication flowing is critically important. And I think good companies are using it in ways to say, hey, we haven't gotten to your resume yet, or this is where we're at in the process. I've really even seen it used really nicely and effectively where candidates, are still in the pipeline and they're just being told, hey, you're
Right.
still in the pipeline, right? Those kinds of things. So I think there's lots of opportunity to leverage AI and use it in a way that drives efficiency as well as builds a positive candidate experience.
So one other thing on AI, and then I have another piece I want to cover for the experience and feedback. You've got to really test your AI, and testing that meaning I've just literally saw an example today where a candidate interviewed, and then they got two emails that next morning from two different hiring leaders, one saying, congratulations, we want to move you on in the process, and the other one saying, thanks, but you're not going to be considered. So really test that process out, make sure you're getting there and communicate internally. But AI really works. Just make sure you really test it and follow through. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the feedback piece. In Joe's side of things, if they've gone through an interview and talked to the hiring leader or everyone else in the process, they will get a phone call regarding their feedback, whether it's good or bad. Right? It's always going to get a phone call because that is the ultimate experience of, hey, unfortunately, sorry, they're not going to move forward, whatever reasons it is. It takes 2 minutes. It could take a little longer. I know it's not the best conversation in the world, but it goes you move mountains with that aspect of it from the experience of at least gave me a phone call.
I agree with you 100%, Joe. I would just say that if everybody followed that advice, we'd see a lot less criticism about HR and talent acquisition people. out there. So, simply put it this way, put yourself on the other end of this, right?
Right.
And I think we've all been in a position where we maybe haven't been treated that way and we knew how it felt. So, like you said, while it might be a difficult conversation, I think it's what we owe the candidates. They've invested time with us. Perhaps they're a candidate for down the road as well, right? We don't know. We don't
Or they're
know.
going to refer a friend, right?
Yeah, they're going to refer a friend. So be kind, be human, treat humans like humans, and don't have a bot send them a letter that they didn't get a job when they took the time to come in and meet with your hiring leader. I would agree
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the other side of it, obviously, if they've applied, you're not going to call everyone that applied. You may not even call everyone back that you phone screen as a recruiter. It could just be a quick email. But if they've gone through the process, give them that decent courtesy of that quick phone call and be able to end the process properly that way.
Yeah.
The other side of the tales of the trenches is some stories. So, Jill, do you have a story on this whole fun candidate experience that you want to share with everyone?
I do actually, but it's a little bizarre. But I'll share a story. So I have a person I'm friends with. They were interviewing for an HR position in a company, and they were actually traveling in from out of town for this interview. They had already gone through a phone screen and kind of met someone on Zoom, and they were coming in town for this interview. So they fully expected coming in, maybe spending an hour to 2 hours with this company, and that would be that, right? So they show up in the lobby for this interview that had been scheduled weeks ahead because they had to book airline tickets and everything else for this, for this candidate. They get there and they're like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know you were coming. Who are you meeting with? Right. So the receptionist seems confused, right? The person sitting there, they're like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to reach that person. I can't find them. So finally things get started for this person. They start with this interview. And ultimately, that person, they meet the first person. They say, okay, now I'm going to have you meet this person. Right. So it seems like they were playing round robin with their whole management team with this candidate. So ultimately, my friend told me, I could not believe this. I was there for 4.5 hours. No one ever offered me the restroom. I had no idea I was meeting all these people. They weren't offered lunch, anything like that. So I would just say it's a story of saying, yeah, maybe communication wasn't done properly in this case, right? Always let your candidate know what to expect, who they're going to meet with. Make sure the people they're meeting with are prepared for the meeting. She went on to tell me that certain people she met with clearly hadn't interviewed people before. They didn't really know why they were meeting with her, etc. So it definitely cast a speculation cloud on this whole thing. The person flew all the way to town. They were interested in this job, right? And kind of left feeling like, what in the heck is going on in that company? They left with a really negative view, right? So I think,
did she get the job?
She actually did get the job. Her immediate feed, it was
and she took it?
Well, the offer was made through a recruiter. Her initial feedback to the recruiter was like, good luck to whoever takes that job, because that company is definitely a mess, right?
Right.
And then as she reflected on it, she really thought about it and looked at it as an opportunity to say, you know what, they really need someone. They don't have anyone who really gets HR. And she basically took it kind of as a risk, saying, hey, it may really not work out, but, it's a good opportunity. She liked the company's product and felt like they had growth potential and those kinds of things. And truthfully, it ended up being a long-term position for her. So it definitely was the right decision for her. But truthfully, it's that whole candidate experience where I think most people wouldn't have taken the job, right? Only a crazy HR person would think of it as an opportunity.
Well, right, because they can potentially fix it, right? I mean, if it's in engineering or sales or other aspects, they probably would have never taken the call back and just said, thanks, but no thanks. So
yeah,
you get a unique piece.
You're right. If an engineer walked in the door and had that experience, they would have definitely walked away saying, why would I leave my current job, my secure position in this other company and come here, because this company clearly has, kind of doesn't have their act together. So I agree with you 100%. So little crazy story, but it worked out for that person, but it's definitely not the brand image you want to project. So.
Yeah, and on the recruiting side, I mean, I think everyone listening is going to go. They've had to reschedule interviews. They've had to rebook plane tickets, and cars didn't show up, or they got a flat tire, or a manager was late, and we all have those stories, and everyone's probably shaking their heads, going, "Yep, I've had to deal with that many times." But here's one that a friend told me. They had a recruiter coming in to interview. So this was a recruiting manager interviewing a recruiter, and you would think a recruiter specifically would be able to be prepared. And the candidate came in there. I mean, they phone screened and they had a good conversation that way. But they came in and they're like, "Okay, so tell me more about what do you think about the company and the products and the different pieces?" And there was this blank stare on their face going, "I don't know what you're talking about." Like, they didn't understand the company, they didn't understand the products, they couldn't talk about it, and only about what their experience was. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you didn't come in prepared for the interview, right? So this is a little bit on the candidate providing a good experience and showcasing back to the hiring team,
Right.
where
Right.
we a lot of talk about the company at fault. This was a candidate at fault, right? So it's a little frustrating, but I think that's where everyone needs to understand the experiences both ways, right? Did the candidate prepare themselves for history of the company or product and knowledge and different aspects that way, along with the hiring leaders and the HR teams and recruiters to be able to walk through those processes.
Right. Yeah, like you said, it's a two-way street, and communication in both directions is really important. And, I can certainly see the company walking away from that feeling a little flat, right? Feeling a little let down.
Yeah, it was. He told me that obviously they didn't get the job, so they moved on to
Hmm.
the next person.
Right.
But
I bet you they never made that mistake again, though, or at least I would hope so.
well, yeah, and so the good part of being a recruiting manager, he told me that they did give him feedback. Oh, listen, great person, some good experience, but you did not come in prepared, and I can't have somebody not prepared for their own interview then be able to prep and work through my hiring leaders and the different parts of the organization. So gave them some good feedback, which hopefully they've learned and take that on to the next time.
Right. Right.
Which comes up to the summary, everyone. Think about what we've talked about. It really comes down to the things we started with, which was communication. The candidate experience really drives through is communication from all aspects and all parties involved in this whole process, right? From the postings to the interviews to the intake sessions, feedback, and really driving through it all. If you can be honest, if you can be clear and drive through those things, that's going to make a good match for everybody, because nobody wants to make a bad hire. Nobody wants the candidate to come in and then leave and be bait and switched behind it. So drive a good candidate experience, give them good feedback, communicate through the process, and really showcase the company in the right way.
Yeah, I would say the other thing outside of communication I would suggest people focus on is really that alignment internally on the process, the timeline, and that kind of strategy session you talked about being so important in shaping this experience. I think if you can work out those things internally and, get aligned on what you want that to look like, you have a way better opportunity of making sure it's a positive experience for your candidate.
I want to thank everyone for listening. I want you to provide comments and feedback, please, as we post this. We will respond to your comments. If you have suggestions, if you have stories of your own, we would love to hear them and be able to share that for the listeners. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, like, share, and communicate within your own network as well.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your stories. We want to know we're not alone. We're not the only people working in this field that have had all of these things happen and kind of lived through all of these different dynamics. So please share your stories with us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.